The rain that morning in Harlem didn't wash anything clean. It just made the grit slicker. It was a cold, gray Tuesday in November of 1965, the kind of day that felt heavy before it even began. The sky hung low over 125th Street, a bruised purple canopy threatening a storm that refused to break. Inside the yellow school bus idling on the corner of Lenox Avenue, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool coats, diesel fumes, and terrified silence. This wasn't a normal field trip. This wasn't a joyride to the zoo or a museum visit. This was a statement. 20 children sat in the vinyl seats. They were the Harlem Honors chess team, the brightest minds from 3 different junior highs, handpicked for their intellect and their discipline. They ranged in age from 10 to 14. They wore their Sunday best, pressed slacks, white shirts that had been bleached to a blinding brightness, patent leather shoes that shone despite the gloom. They held their chessboards on their laps like shields. They were soldiers in a war they hadn't asked to fight, heading to a state championship tournament in a part of Queens where the welcome signs were not meant for them. Mrs. Gable, the chaperone and history teacher, stood at the front of the bus. She was a woman of immense dignity, usually unshakable, but today her hands trembled as she clutched her clipboard. She looked out the windshield at the familiar streets of Harlem, knowing that in a few miles, the world would change. "All right, everyone," Mrs. Gable said, her voice tight but steady. "Remember what we practiced. Eyes forward. No engaging with anyone outside the bus. If we stop, you stay in your seats. You are ambassadors of Harlem. You are kings and queens. Do not let anyone pull you from your throne." A small boy in the 3rd row, Leo, raised his hand. He was 12, a prodigy who could see checkmate in 5 moves, but right now he couldn't see past the fog on the window. "Mrs. Gable?" Leo whispered. "My mama said, she said the men in the white hoods sent a letter. She said they gonna burn the bus." A ripple of fear went through the bus. The air seemed to get colder. "Your mother worries, Leo," Mrs. Gable said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But we have a driver who knows the roads. Mr. Henderson has been driving for 30 years. Mr. Henderson, the driver, didn't look back. His knuckles were white on the oversized steering wheel. He was a good man, a deacon at the Abyssinian Baptist Church, but he was sweating through his uniform shirt. He knew the route. He knew the threats. He had seen the letter too, scrawled in jagged red ink, pinned to the school door the morning before. Turn around or burn. He had gone to the police precinct the day before, hat in hand. The desk sergeant, a man with a face like a slab of cold ham, had barely looked up from his paperwork. "Out of our jurisdiction, Henderson. If you folks want to go where you aren't wanted, that's your business. Don't expect us to provide an escort for a chess game." So they were alone, just a yellow tin can filled with children rolling toward a fire. Or so they thought. "Close the door, Mr. Henderson." A voice rumbled from the very back of the bus. It was a deep, gravelly voice, low and smooth like a cello played in a basement. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the hum of the engine and the nervous breathing of the children. Every head turned. In the back row, the long bench seat that spanned the width of the bus, sat a solitary figure. He was almost swallowed by the shadows. He wore a heavy charcoal gray wool trench coat with the collar turned up. A fedora was pulled low over his eyes. He was reading a copy of the Amsterdam News, the pages held open by hands that were large, manicured, and steady as stone. The kids whispered. They didn't know who he was. Not really. They just knew he looked like the men in the movies, the ones who didn't talk much but made things happen. Mrs. Gable knew. She remembered the desperation that had driven her to the 22 West restaurant the night before. She remembered walking past the line of men in sharp suits, past the cloud of cigar smoke, to the table in the back where the king of Harlem held court. She had pleaded for safety. She hadn't asked for money. She hadn't asked for violence. She just asked for passage. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson had looked at her over a game of chess. He moved a knight, took a sip of coffee, and said 2 words. What time? Now, he was here. The insurance. We're moving, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cracking slightly. He pulled the lever and the doors hissed shut, sealing them in. The bus lurched forward, groaning as it merged into the morning traffic of 125th Street. For the first 20 minutes, it felt like a parade. As they moved through central Harlem, people on the sidewalks stopped to watch. Shopkeepers came out to wave. They knew the chess team was going to the championship. It was a point of pride. The barber raised his razor in a salute. The lady selling bean pies at the corner blew a kiss. Bumpy Johnson didn't wave. He didn't look out the window. He turned the page of his newspaper. Snap. The sound was sharp in the quiet bus. Leo, the young chess player, turned around in his seat, peering over the vinyl backrest. He stared at the man in the back. He had heard stories on the stoops, stories about a man named Bumpy who fought the Italians, who fought the police, who owned the night. Bumpy lowered the paper just an inch. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met Leo's. "You play the Sicilian defense, son?" Bumpy asked. Leo blinked, surprised. "Yes, sir. Sometimes." "Aggressive," Bumpy noted, a ghost of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Good. But be careful with your queen. Don't bring her out too early. Fight for the center, even from the flanks. Control the middle of the board, and the edges will take care of themselves." "Yes, sir," Leo whispered. "Turn around," Bumpy said gently. Eyes forward. A king never looks back in fear. He looks forward to the conquest. Leo turned around, sitting straighter. He clutched his board tighter. He felt safer. He didn't know why, but the man in the back felt heavier than the bus itself. The bus rumbled on. They passed the Apollo Theater. They passed the Hotel Teresa. And then the landscape began to change. They reached the edge of Harlem, the invisible line. The buildings changed from the familiar brownstones and tenements to warehouses and industrial lots. The friendly faces on the sidewalk disappeared, replaced by empty streets and the occasional delivery truck. The vibrant energy of the neighborhood faded into a cold, gray desolation. They were heading toward the bridge, the gateway to Queens. But to get there, they had to pass through the Gullet, a stretch of access road bordered by old factories and a scrapyard near the river. It was a no man's land, a place where the city seemed to hold its breath. The rain started to fall harder. It lashed against the windows, blurring the world outside into streaks of gray and black. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of the wipers became the heartbeat of the bus. Mr. Henderson slowed down. "Getting thick out there," he muttered. "Visibility is poor." "Keep moving, Henderson," Bumpy's voice drifted from the back. "Don't slow down." "I can barely see, Mr. Johnson," Henderson said, squinting. "That's why you don't stop," Bumpy said. "Wolves like the fog." The bus entered the underpass beneath the train tracks. It was dark here. The streetlights shot out long ago. The sound of the rain was amplified, echoing off the concrete walls. Suddenly, headlights flared in the darkness ahead. High beams, blindingly bright. A pickup truck, rusted and battered, swerved out from behind a concrete pillar. It didn't just pull out, it lunged. It screeched across the wet asphalt, sliding sideways, blocking the entire 2 lanes of the underpass. "Jesus!" Henderson yelled, slamming on the brakes. The bus shrieked. The tires locked up, skidding on the slick road. The children screamed, thrown forward against the seats in front of them. Chess pieces scattered across the floor, knights and pawns rolling in every direction. The bus came to a halt just feet from the truck's bumper. "Is everyone okay?" Mrs. Gable cried out, grabbing a seat to steady herself. "Leo? Sarah?" "We're okay," a voice cried back. "Don't move," Henderson whispered, staring out the windshield. "Oh, Lord, here they come." In the rearview mirror, 2 more sets of headlights appeared. 2 more trucks roared out of the alley behind them, blocking the retreat. They were boxed in, a classic pincer movement. The doors of the trucks flew open. Men poured out. They didn't look like men. They looked like nightmares. They wore heavy work boots, denim jackets, and masks. Some wore white hoods fashioned from pillowcases with crude eye holes cut out. Others wore bandanas over their faces. They looked less like an organized army and more like a hired pack of thugs dressed for a part. But their intent was clear in their hands. Baseball bats, tire irons, heavy rusted chains. One man carried a sledgehammer. There were at least 20 of them. A mob. A pack of wild dogs who had cornered a rabbit. "Lock the door!" Mrs. Gable screamed. Henderson fumbled for the lever, jamming it into the locked position. The mob surrounded the bus. They moved with a terrifying, silent coordination. They didn't shout at first. They just started hitting the bus. Thump. A bat slammed into the metal side of the bus. It sounded like a gunshot. Crash. A chain whipped against the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass right in front of Henderson's face. He flinched, covering his head. The children were screaming now, a high-pitched wail of pure terror. They scrambled away from the windows, huddling in the center aisle, clutching each other. Leo was under his seat, crying, holding his king piece so tight it cut into his palm. "Get down! Everyone get down on the floor!" Mrs. Gable shouted, throwing herself over 2 of the younger girls to shield them. The mob leader walked to the front of the bus. He was a giant of a man, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves ripped off, revealing arms thick with muscle and hate. He wore a burlap sack over his head, a single eye hole revealing a blue manic eye. He held a crowbar. He tapped the glass of the door with the crowbar. Tink, tink, tink. "Open up, boy," he roared. His voice was muffled by the mask, but still booming. "We got a toll for this road. You gotta pay the toll." The men outside laughed. It was a cruel, hyena sound. They started rocking the bus. 20 men pushing in unison. The suspension groaned. The bus swayed violently side to side. The kids tumbled over each other in the aisle. "Open it, or we burn it," someone yelled. A torch flared to life outside, the orange flame hissing in the rain. Henderson was paralyzed. He looked at the door, then back at the kids. He was sobbing. I can't open it." The mob leader didn't wait. He jammed the flat end of the crowbar into the rubber seal of the folding doors. He leaned back, putting his weight into it. Creak! The metal groaned in protest. The lock strained. "He's breaking in," Leo screamed. In the back of the bus, the newspaper was folded. Neatly. Precisely. Bumpy Johnson placed the paper on the empty seat beside him. He adjusted his cufflinks. He stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He moved with the slow, terrifying inevitability of a glacier. He walked down the center aisle, stepping over the huddled children. He didn't look down at them. He kept his eyes fixed on the front door. His trench coat swirled around his legs. The fedora cast a shadow over his eyes, but his mouth was set in a grim, hard line. At the front of the bus, the doors gave way with a loud pop. The mechanism snapped. The doors swung open, letting in the wind, the rain, and the smell of unwashed bodies and gasoline. The mob leader stepped up onto the first step of the bus. He raised the crowbar high, ready to smash the first thing he saw. "All right, you little—" He stopped. He wasn't looking at a terrified bus driver. He wasn't looking at a crying school teacher. He was looking at a tailored Italian suit. He looked up. And up. Bumpy Johnson stood at the top of the stairs, blocking the aisle. He filled the space. He looked down at the man in the mask with an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't anger. It was disgust. It was the look a man gives a cockroach before he steps on it. The bus went silent. The kids stopped crying, sensing the shift in the air. The rain drummed on the roof. "You lost?" Bumpy asked. His voice was low, smooth, and colder than the grave. The mob leader hesitated. The mask hid his face, but his body language shifted. He lowered the crowbar slightly. "Who the hell are you, Grandpa? Get out of the way. We want the kids." Bumpy didn't move. He reached into his coat. The mob leader flinched, raising the crowbar again. "Don't you try it. I'll split your skull." Bumpy's hand came out. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a lighter. A gold Zippo. Click, whir, snap. The flame flared up. Bumpy brought a cigar to his lips. A Havana, thick and dark. He lit it, taking a long, slow drag. The cherry glowed red. He exhaled a cloud of blue smoke that drifted into the mob leader's face. "You made a mistake," Bumpy said softly. "Yeah? What mistake is that?" The leader sneered, regaining his confidence. "We got you surrounded. We got fire. We got numbers. You're just one old man." Bumpy smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a shark's smile. "The mistake," Bumpy said, "is that you think this is a school bus." "It's yellow. It's got kids," the leader laughed. "Looks like a school bus to me." Bumpy took another drag. He tapped the ash onto the step, right near the leader's muddy boot. "No," Bumpy whispered. "This isn't a school bus. It's a hearse." The leader blinked. "A hearse? For who?" Bumpy leaned forward, his face inches from the mask. "For you." Bumpy didn't shout. He didn't scream. He simply snapped his fingers. Once. A sharp, crisp sound that echoed in the underpass. For a second, nothing happened. The rain continued to fall. Then the shadows moved. From the darkened rafters of the train trestle above the bus, shapes dropped. Like spiders. Like raindrops. Thud. 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 3 men landed on the roof of the bus. From the drainage ditches on either side of the road, the piles of trash stood up. They were men in long coats, holding Thompson submachine guns and pump-action shotguns. From the darkness of the tunnel behind the mob's trucks, a pair of headlights flicked on. Then another. Then another. A sleek, black Lincoln Continental rolled forward, flanked by 2 Cadillacs. The mob leader spun around, looking out the bus door. His men, the 20 tough guys with bats and chains, were backing away. They were lowering their weapons. Because standing in the rain, forming a perfect circle around the mob, were 30 of Harlem's hardest men. Junie Bird was there, holding a shotgun that looked like a toy in his massive hands. Red Dillard was there, spinning a switchblade. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't need to. They wanted these men to see their faces. The mob leader looked back at Bumpy. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sudden, violent trembling. "You," the leader stammered. "You're—" "Bumpy." The voice came from the bus driver, Mr. Henderson. He was staring at the man in the trench coat with awe. "That's Bumpy Johnson." The name hit the mob leader like a physical blow. He knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. He wasn't dealing with a schoolteacher. He was dealing with the devil of Harlem. Bumpy took the cigar out of his mouth. He looked at the crowbar in the man's hand. "Drop it," Bumpy said. The crowbar clattered to the metal steps. "Step off the bus," Bumpy commanded. The leader backed down the stairs, his hands raised. Bumpy followed him down, stepping into the rain. He didn't cringe from the weather. The rain seemed to avoid him. Bumpy walked into the center of the circle. The mobsters were huddled together now, their backs against their trucks, surrounded by Bumpy's crew. They looked like frightened sheep. The predators had become the prey in the span of 10 seconds. Junie Bird walked up to Bumpy. "What's the play, boss? You want us to swim 'em? The river is right there." The kids were watching from the windows now, their faces pressed against the glass. They saw their grandfather standing in the rain, commanding an army. Bumpy looked at the mob. He looked at the kids in the window. "No," Bumpy said. "No bodies today. Not in front of the children. We're setting an example." Bumpy turned to the mob leader. "Take off the mask." The leader hesitated. Junie Bird racked his shotgun. Click, clack. The leader ripped the burlap sack off his head. He was a middle-aged man, red-faced, sweating, with a weak chin and fear in his eyes. He looked nothing like a monster now. He looked like a plumber who had made a very bad decision. "Please," the man begged. We were just scaring him. We weren't going to hurt nobody. It was just a prank. Some guy paid us to stop the bus." "A prank," Bumpy repeated. He looked at the cracked windshield of the bus. He looked at the torch lying in the mud. "You scared the children," Bumpy said. "You made them cry. You interrupted their game. I don't like it when people interrupt the game." Bumpy pointed to the front tire of the bus. It was slashed, hissing air. "You broke my bus," Bumpy said. I'll pay for it," the man stammered, reaching for his wallet. Bumpy slapped the wallet out of his hand. It landed in a puddle. "I don't want your money," Bumpy said. "I want your labor." Bumpy pointed to the flat tire. "Change it." The man blinked. "What?" "The tire," Bumpy said. "You slashed it, you fix it, and you do it now, in the rain, while we watch." Bumpy knocked on the bus door. "Henderson, give this man the jack and the iron." Henderson, emboldened, scrambled to the side compartment and retrieved the heavy hydraulic bus jack and the massive 4-way lug wrench. He tossed them into the mud at the mob leader's feet. Bumpy turned to the other men in the mob. "And the rest of you. You blocked the road." He pointed to the rusted pickup trucks blocking the path. "Move them. But don't start the engines. Push them. Push them into the ditch. Clear the road." The mobsters looked at each other. This was humiliating. This was worse than a beating. This was servitude. "You heard the man," Junie Bird roared, firing a single shot into the air. Boom! The mob moved. They scrambled. For the next 20 minutes, the strangest scene in the history of New York gangland played out under that bridge. The mob leader was on his knees in the mud, wrestling with the rusted lug nuts of a 10-ton bus. He was soaked, covered in grease, and weeping silently as he strained against the wrench. His soldiers were grunting and straining, pushing their own trucks off the road and into the muddy ditch, ruining their vehicles. Bumpy stood under the shelter of the overpass, smoking his cigar, watching. He didn't say a word. He just watched. Inside the bus, the fear had evaporated. The kids were cheering. "Look at him," Leo shouted, pointing at the man in the mud. "He looks like a worm." Mrs. Gable stood at the window, her hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. She wasn't crying from fear anymore. She was crying because, for the first time in her life, she saw justice. It wasn't the justice of the courts, and it wasn't the justice of the police. It was the justice of the street. It was Bumpy's justice. When the tire was fixed and the road was clear, the mob leader stood up. He was shivering. He wiped his muddy hands on his pants. "It's done," he whispered, not daring to look Bumpy in the eye. "Can we go?" Bumpy walked up to him. He reached out and straightened the man's collar. The man flinched, thinking he was going to be hit. Bumpy just brushed a speck of dirt off his shoulder. "One more thing," Bumpy said. His voice dropped to a whisper that only the man could hear. "These children are going to a championship. They are going to play chess. They are going to win." Bumpy gripped the man's shoulder. His fingers dug in like steel claws. "If I hear that a single hair on their heads was touched, if I hear that someone called them a name, if I hear that the wind blew too hard on them in Queens." Bumpy leaned in close. He smelled of tobacco and death. "I will come to your house. I will sit in your kitchen. I will eat your food. And I will wait for you to come home. And we will finish this conversation. Do you understand?" The man nodded frantically. Yes, I understand. No trouble, I swear." "Get out of here," Bumpy said, releasing him. "Run." The mobsters ran. They didn't go to their trucks in the ditch. They just ran on foot, disappearing into the rain, leaving their weapons and their dignity behind. Bumpy turned back to the bus. His crew stood at attention. "Junie," Bumpy said, "you and the boys follow the bus, all the way to the school door. Wait outside until they come out, then bring them home." "You got it, boss," Junie said. Bumpy walked back up the stairs of the bus. He shook the rain off his coat. He looked at the stunned faces of the children. They were looking at him like he was a superhero, like he was Batman in a trench coat. He stopped at Leo's seat. "The center of the board, son," Bumpy said, winking. "Control the center, and the enemy has nowhere to move." He tipped his hat to Mrs. Gable. "Have a nice field trip, ma'am." Bumpy stepped off the bus. He walked to his black Lincoln, waiting in the shadows. Mr. Henderson, shaking but smiling, put the bus in gear. He drove past the abandoned trucks, past the discarded masks in the mud. As the bus cleared the tunnel and drove into the light, Leo looked back. He saw Bumpy Johnson standing by his car, a silhouette against the gray sky, watching them go. Leo turned back to his chessboard. He moved his king to the center square. Check, he whispered to no one. But the story didn't end on the road to Queens, because in Harlem, nothing ends without a ripple. While Bumpy had been saving the children, something else had been happening. A distraction. The KKK attack, or the performance of it, hadn't just been a random act of hate. It had been a probe, a test. While Bumpy and his best men, Junie Bird, Red Dillard, the heavy hitters, were out at the edge of town dealing with the bus, the heart of Harlem had been left exposed. Bumpy sat in the back of his Lincoln as they drove back toward 125th Street. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, replaced by that nagging instinct, the one that had kept him alive for 30 years. The wrongness. "Radio," Bumpy said to his driver. The driver turned on the police scanner. Static. Then a voice. 10 to 13, officer down, shots fired at Lenox Terrace. Multiple assailants. Smoke reported. Lenox Terrace. Bumpy's home. "Turn it up," Bumpy snapped. Report of an explosion at the penthouse. Repeat, explosion at the Johnson residence. Bumpy's heart stopped. Mamie. She was home. She had stayed behind because she had a cold. She was alone in the apartment. "Step on it," Bumpy growled. The calm, cool chess player vanished. The monster returned. The driver slammed on the gas. The Lincoln roared, tearing through the wet streets, running red lights. It was a diversion, Bumpy whispered, his hands clenching into fists so tight the leather of his gloves groaned. The bus, the Klan, it was a puppet show, to draw me out. Who? Who would use the KKK as a pawn? Who would target children just to get Bumpy away from his house? Only someone who didn't care about the rules. Only someone who wanted to burn the board. As the Lincoln screeched around the corner onto Lenox Avenue, Bumpy saw it. Smoke. Black, oily smoke, billowing from the top floor of Lenox Terrace. Flames licked the edge of the balcony where he and Mamie used to drink coffee. "Mamie!" Bumpy screamed, the sound tearing from his throat. The car hadn't even stopped moving when Bumpy kicked the door open. He rolled onto the pavement, scrambling to his feet, running toward the building. The lobby was chaos. Fire alarms were ringing. People were running out with suitcases. Bumpy charged against the tide. He hit the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. His lungs burned. His bad knee screamed, but he didn't feel it. All he felt was the terror of a man who realizes he won the battle but lost the war. He reached the penthouse floor. The hallway was filled with smoke. The door to his apartment was blown off its hinges. "Mamie!" he roared, plunging into the smoke. He found her in the hallway. She wasn't burned. She wasn't shot. She was sitting on the floor, coughing, her face covered in soot. She was holding a wet towel over her mouth. "Ellsworth," she cried when she saw him. Bumpy fell to his knees, grabbing her, checking her for wounds. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm okay," she coughed. "I'm okay." A bomb. Someone threw a firebomb through the window. I was in the bath. I heard the glass break. Bumpy hugged her, burying his face in her neck. She was alive. Thank God she was alive. But then he looked up. On the wall of the living room, amidst the ruin of their furniture and the smoke damage, someone had spray-painted a message. It was crude, dripping in red paint that looked like blood. It wasn't a KKK slogan. It wasn't a racial slur. It was a single word. A name, Dutch. Bumpy stared at the name. His blood ran cold. Dutch Schultz. But Dutch was dead. Bumpy had helped kill him years ago. Dutch Schultz was a memory, a ghost of the old wars. "Who did this?" Bumpy whispered. "I didn't see them," Mamie sobbed. "But they left something on the table." Bumpy stood up. He walked to the dining table, which was scorched but standing. Sitting in the center of the table was a chess piece, a white knight. But the head of the horse had been cut off, and under it was a note. The bus was the opening move. You saved the pawns, but you left the queen unguarded. "The game isn't over, Bumpy. The dead don't stay dead." Bumpy crushed the note in his hand. It wasn't the KKK. The KKK were idiots. They were tools. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who knew Bumpy. Someone who knew his weakness was his need to be the hero. Someone who knew he would leave his castle to save the village. Bumpy walked to the balcony. The fire trucks were arriving below, sirens wailing. The rain was still falling, mixing with the smoke. He looked out over Harlem, his city. He had just humiliated the mob in Queens. He had saved the children. He should have been celebrating. But as he looked at the city, the buildings seemed to twist. The shadows seemed to lengthen. He realized then that the bus ride wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. A ghost had come to Harlem. A ghost that knew how to play chess. Bumpy Johnson put the headless knight in his pocket. His eyes turned black, the pupils dilating until there was no humanity left. "Junie," Bumpy said into the smoke, knowing his enforcer had just arrived and was right behind him. "Yeah, boss?" Junie asked, coughing. "Call the boys," Bumpy said. "All of them. Lock down the city. Nobody comes in. Nobody goes out." "What are we looking for?" Junie asked. "We're looking for a dead man," Bumpy said. "And when we find him, I'm going to kill him again." The rain fell harder, washing the soot off the balcony, but it couldn't wash away the fear. The game had begun, and this time, Bumpy Johnson wasn't playing white. He was playing black, and black moves for the kill. The smoke from Lenox Terrace didn't just smell like burning wood and fabric. It smelled like violation. It clung to the wool of Bumpy Johnson's trench coat, a persistent, acrid reminder that the sanctuary of his home had been breached. The fire department had extinguished the flames, but they couldn't extinguish the cold rage that had settled in Bumpy's marrow. He stood in the basement of the 22 West Restaurant, a windowless room that served as his war room when the world above ground became too dangerous. The walls were lined with shelves of wine and dusty ledgers. In the center of the room sat a heavy oak table, and on that table lay the headless white knight chess piece. "Mamie is safe?" Bumpy asked, not turning around. He was staring at a map of Harlem pinned to the wall, his eyes tracing the invisible lines of territory and power. "She's at your sister's in Queens," Junie Bird rumbled from the shadows near the stairs. The big enforcer looked uneasy. He was used to fighting men he could see, men he could hit. Fighting a ghost was different. 2 guards at the front, 2 at the back. Nobody gets in unless they know the password, and even then, they don't get in unless I say so. "Good," Bumpy said. He picked up a piece of chalk and drew a circle around the location of the bus ambush. Then he drew another circle around Lenox Terrace. 2 attacks, 1 distraction, 1 strike. "Who is he, boss?" Junie asked. "Dutch Schultz is dead. We know he's dead. You were there when the Italians took him apart in Newark. A man don't come back from a .45 slug to the gut." "Men don't," Bumpy said softly, "but legends do, and fear does." Bumpy turned to face his crew. There were 6 of them, the lieutenants who controlled the numbers, the protection rackets, and the streets. They looked rattled. The name Dutch had spooked them. Dutch Schultz had been a mad dog, a chaotic force of nature who killed without rhyme or reason. If someone had taken up his mantle, the order Bumpy had spent 20 years building was in danger of collapsing into anarchy. "This isn't a ghost," Bumpy said, his voice hard as flint. "Ghosts don't buy gasoline. Ghosts don't paint graffiti. This is a man who wants us to chase shadows while he cuts our throats." He pointed to the headless knight. "He thinks he's playing chess," Bumpy continued. "He thinks he took my queen by hitting my house. But he missed. And now, it's my turn." "What's the move?" Red Dillard asked, flipping his switchblade nervously. "We flush him out," Bumpy said. "Dutch Schultz was known for one thing above all else: greed. He wanted it all. If this pretender wants to be Dutch, he'll have to act like him. He won't be able to resist the collection spots." Bumpy looked at the clock. It was 4 p.m. The numbers runners would be turning in their daily slips and cash at the Blue Hour Lounge in exactly 1 hour. It was one of the biggest banks in Harlem. "Junie," Bumpy said, "take the car. Go to the Blue Hour. Don't go inside. Wait across the street. Watch the roof. Watch the alley. If our ghost is hungry, that's where he'll eat." The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Harlem slick and black, reflecting the neon signs that were just beginning to flicker to life. 125th Street was quiet, an unnatural hush that usually preceded a storm. Word had spread. The streets knew. The Klan had been humiliated. Bumpy's house had been bombed, and a dead man's name was on the wall. The people stayed inside, locking their doors, waiting to see which titan would fall. Junie Bird sat in a nondescript sedan across from the Blue Hour Lounge. He chewed on a toothpick, his eyes scanning the street. He watched the numbers runners go in. Kids with brown paper bags, old women with shopping carts, the invisible army of the Harlem economy. They went in with cash. They came out empty-handed. Inside that club, there was a safe with $50,000 in small bills. It was a tempting target for a dead man. "Boss thinks he's gonna show?" The driver, a young kid named Silas, asked. "Boss thinks," Junie grunted. "That's enough for me." 20 minutes passed, then 30. Then Junie saw it. It wasn't a car pulling up. It wasn't a team of gunmen kicking in the front door. It was a delivery truck, a milk truck, white and boxy, rolling slowly down the alley behind the club. "Milk delivery?" Silas frowned. "At 5 in the afternoon?" Junie sat up straighter. "Dutch used to own the beer trucks," he whispered. "He used them to move product during Prohibition." The truck stopped behind the Blue Hour. The driver didn't get out. Instead, the back doors of the truck opened. 2 men jumped out. They weren't wearing masks. They were wearing wide-brimmed hats and long coats, dressed like it was 1935. They carried Tommy guns, ancient, heavy weapons that belonged in a museum or a grave. "We got him," Junie said, reaching for the radio. "Boss, we got activity at the Blue Hour. 2 shooters, vintage hardware." "Don't engage." Bumpy's voice crackled over the radio. "Let them make the move. I want to see who they are." Junie watched. The 2 men kicked open the back door of the lounge. There was shouting inside. A few seconds later, the distinct, rhythmic chatter of the Tommy guns echoed into the street. Rat-a-tat-tat. It was a sound Harlem hadn't heard in decades. People on the sidewalk screamed and scattered. Minutes later, the men ran out, carrying canvas bags. They jumped back into the milk truck. "They're rabbiting," Junie yelled. "We're in pursuit." "Do not stop them," Bumpy ordered. "Follow them. I want to know where the rat hole is." The chase began. The milk truck lumbered through the streets, heading north, past the edge of Bumpy's territory, moving toward the Bronx. Junie stayed 3 cars back, driving with the lights off. They crossed the bridge. The landscape changed from the brownstones of Harlem to the industrial decay of the South Bronx. The truck turned into an old shipyard, a graveyard of rusted metal and crumbling brick. It stopped in front of a massive derelict building. The sign above the door was faded, but Junie could still make out the letters. Schultz Brewing Company. "You gotta be kidding me," Junie whispered. "He's hiding in Dutch's old brewery?" "It's theater." Bumpy's voice came over the radio, calm and analytical. "He's putting on a show. He wants us to come there. He wants the final scene to be on his stage." "So we don't go?" Junie asked. "No," Bumpy said. "We go. But we don't go as an audience. We go as critics." An hour later, the area around the Schultz Brewery was silent. The wind whistled through the broken windows of the massive brick factory. It looked like a castle of rot, a monument to a forgotten empire. Bumpy Johnson stepped out of his car a block away. He wasn't wearing his trench coat anymore. He was wearing a tactical jacket, tight and dark. He checked his .38 snub-nose. He checked the throwing knife in his boot. He looked at Junie and the 10 men he had assembled. They were the best of the best. "This is a trap," Bumpy said. "The building is likely rigged. Dutch loved dynamite. This copycat will probably love C4. Watch your step. Check for tripwires. And remember, the man inside isn't a ghost. He bleeds." "How do we play this, boss?" Red Dillard asked. "Junie, take the back. Red, take the roof. I'm going through the front door." "The front?" Junie protested. "That's suicide." "He's expecting me," Bumpy said. "It would be rude to keep him waiting." Bumpy walked toward the main entrance. The massive double doors were ajar, creaking in the wind. Above the door, freshly painted in that same dripping red paint, were the words, "The Dutchman is home." Bumpy pushed the doors open. The interior of the brewery was a cavern of shadows and rusted vats. Moonlight streamed through the holes in the roof, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The smell of stale beer and mold was overwhelming. In the center of the factory floor, illuminated by a single spotlight powered by a humming generator, sat a table. On the table was a chessboard. And sitting behind the table was a man. He wore a pinstripe suit that looked 2 sizes too big, a fedora tilted at a rakish angle, and he was smoking a cigar. His face was in shadow. "You're late, Bumpy," the man called out. His voice was scratchy, an imitation of the old gangster drawl. "I expected better from a king." Bumpy walked into the light. He stopped 10 feet from the table. He didn't draw his gun. He just looked at the man. "You went to a lot of trouble," Bumpy said. "The bus, the bomb, the milk truck. It's a nice production. A bit derivative, but high energy." "History repeats itself," the man said, leaning forward. "First as tragedy, then as farce. Dutch was the tragedy. I am the correction." "You're not Dutch," Bumpy said. "Dutch was a psychopath, but he had style. You're just a thief with a history book." The man laughed. He stood up, and took off his hat. The light hit his face. He was young, maybe 25. He had a scar running down his cheek and eyes that burned with a fanatical, unstable light. Bumpy recognized him, not as a gangster, but as a nobody. A kid he had kicked out of a pool hall 3 years ago for cheating. His name was Cyrus, the calculator Vance. A small-time numbers runner who was good with math, but bad with people. Cyrus, Bumpy said, shaking his head. All this, for what? You want my territory? You want the numbers? I want the respect, Cyrus screamed, his voice cracking, losing the fake accent. I did the math, Bumpy. I ran the probabilities. You're an anomaly. You should have been dead 10 years ago. The Italians, the police, the feds. Statistically, you are impossible. And I hate anomalies. I fix the equation. Cyrus gestured to the floor near his feet. A stack of canvas bags lay there, the loot from the Blue Hour and more. And I found his money. Dutch's money. It was buried in the Catskills. I found the map in an old ledger. I dug it up and brought it here to his home. Millions, Bumpy. Enough to buy an army. Enough to buy your city. From the shadows of the vats, men stepped out. Mercenaries, not local boys, but pros. They held automatic weapons trained on Bumpy. Checkmate, Cyrus grinned. The king is isolated. The queen is hiding. The pawns are useless. Bumpy looked around at the dozen guns pointed at him. He didn't flinch. He looked back at the chessboard on the table. You set up the board, Bumpy said, pointing to the pieces. But you forgot one thing about chess, Cyrus. And what's that? Cyrus sneered, picking up a gun from the table. You have to control the whole board, not just the center. Bumpy reached into his pocket. He pulled out the headless white knight he had found in his apartment. He placed it on the board. And you have to know when your opponent is playing a different game. Bumpy tapped the table 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. The skylights above them shattered. Red Dillard and 3 of Harlem's best marksmen dropped from ropes, firing as they descended. At the same time, the massive brewing vats behind the mercenaries hissed violently. Junie Bird had found the pressure valves. Scalding white steam and industrial dust blasted into the room, blinding the mercenaries, turning the factory into a foggy killing floor. It's a trap, Cyrus screamed, firing wildly into the mist. It's not a trap, Cyrus. Bumpy's voice came from the fog, moving, impossible to pinpoint. It's a lesson. The gunfight was brief and brutal. Bumpy's men knew the terrain. Junie had studied the blueprints on the way over. They moved like ghosts in the steam. The mercenaries hired guns with no loyalty, panicked and ran, only to be cut down or disarmed. Cyrus was left alone at the table, coughing, waving his gun at the swirling white clouds. "Where are you?" he shrieked. "Face me, I am the new Dutch." A hand reached out of the mist and grabbed Cyrus by the wrist. With a sickening crunch, the gun fell from his hand. Bumpy stepped through the steam. He didn't look like a chess player now. He looked like the angel of death. He grabbed Cyrus by the lapels of his oversized suit and slammed him onto the chess table. The pieces flew into the air. Kings, queens, and pawns scattering across the dirty floor. "You're not Dutch," Bumpy whispered, his face inches from the terrified kid. "Dutch was a monster, but he built something. You just found a dead man's wallet and bought a costume." Bumpy pulled out his switchblade. The blade glinted in the spotlight. "Please," Cyrus begged, crying now. "I have money. I have millions. I can give it to you. We can split Harlem." "I already have Harlem," Bumpy said. "Harlem isn't about money, Cyrus. It's about the people. It's about the kids on that bus. You threatened them. You threatened my wife." Bumpy brought the knife down. Cyrus screamed and closed his eyes. Thud. The knife buried itself deep into the wood of the table, right between Cyrus's fingers. It vibrated with the force of the blow. Cyrus opened his eyes, gasping, checking his hand. He was uncut. "I'm not going to kill you," Bumpy said. Cyrus sobbed with relief. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." "Killing you would make you a martyr," Bumpy said, standing up and adjusting his jacket. "It would make people think you were a player, that you were a rival." Bumpy signaled to Junie, who emerged from the steam holding a burlap sack. "We're going to take you back to Harlem," Bumpy said. "We're going to take you to the corner of 125th and Lenox, and we're going to strip you of this suit. We're going to put a sign on you that says, 'I scared the children,' and we're going to leave you there." "No," Cyrus whispered. That's worse." "In my city," Bumpy said, "respect is the only currency, and you are bankrupt." Junie grabbed Cyrus and dragged him away, kicking and screaming. Bumpy stood alone in the brewery. He looked at the chessboard. The only piece left standing was the headless white knight he had placed there. He picked it up. He put it back in his pocket. He walked to the corner where Cyrus had dropped the bags of Dutch Schultz's millions. He didn't touch them. He walked out of the brewery, leaving the treasure in the dark. He would call the police anonymously to find it. Let the city have the cursed money. Bumpy didn't want ghosts in his pocket. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds over Harlem. It was a crisp, bright autumn day. The wreckage at Lenox Terrace was already being cleared. Contractors were up there, fixing the balcony, painting over the scorch marks. Bumpy sat in the diner down the street drinking coffee. Mamie sat across from him. She looked tired, but she was smiling. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over," Bumpy said. "Cyrus is in custody. The police found him tied to a lamppost. He was begging to be arrested." "And the men from the bus?" she asked. Bumpy took a sip of coffee. "They're fixing the community center roof as we speak. I sent Junie to, supervise. I figured since they like working on vehicles so much, they'd enjoy a little carpentry." Mamie laughed. It was a beautiful sound, the sound of life returning to normal. Just then, the door of the diner opened. A group of kids walked in. They were wearing medals around their necks. Gold medals. It was the chess team. They had won the championship. They saw Bumpy in the booth. The diner went quiet. Leo, the boy from the bus, walked up to the table. He looked nervous, but he stood tall. He held his gold medal in one hand and something else in the other. "Mr. Johnson," Leo said. Bumpy looked up. "Congratulations, son. I heard you swept the tournament." "I used the Sicilian defense," Leo beamed. "Just like you said. Controlled the center." Leo held out his hand. He placed a chess piece on the table. It was his black king. "My mom said, she said you saved us," Leo said. "She said I should give you this, because you're the real king." Bumpy looked at the plastic chess piece. It was worth pennies. But to Bumpy, in that moment, it was worth more than Dutch Schultz's millions. He picked it up. He replaced the headless knight in his pocket with the black king. "Thank you, Leo," Bumpy said. His voice thick with emotion he rarely showed. "Keep your medal. You earned it. Just do me one favor." "Anything, sir," Leo said. "Teach the other kids," Bumpy said. "Teach them how to play. Teach them that the pawn can become a queen if it keeps moving forward. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Leo said. The kids cheered and went to the counter to order milkshakes. Bumpy looked at Mamie. She squeezed his hand. "You're a good man, Ellsworth," she whispered. "I'm a dangerous man, Mamie," Bumpy corrected her, looking out the window at the streets he ruled. "But I'm dangerous for the right reasons." He finished his coffee. The game was over. The board was clear. But Bumpy knew that in Harlem, a new game was always just beginning. There would always be a new challenger, a new ghost, a new threat. And he would be ready. Because the king never leaves the board until the game is done.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.